Hello and welcome back to another update where I cover the latest developments throughout the front line in the Russo-Ukrainian war. It is your host Weeb Union, and in this one we have a lot of updates. Deep State map updated for the first time in 4 days, which led to about 26 square kilometers of unknown advances by the Russians being revealed by the Deep State map sources. The Russians have also managed to advance in the direction of Kursk and Chasiv Yar. They have also expanded their foothold across the Oski River line in the direction of the Vorishne, north of Kupiansk. According to Russian sources, the Russians have initiated a new offensive in the Kursk region, where they're practically attacking from every single section of the front line in the Kursk region, where they are trying to kick out the Ukrainian forces. According to the source, the Russians have been gathering troops a long time there. The Ukrainians, in kind, have gathered a lot of their own forces there as well for a large-scale battle in the Kursk region, where both sides are sending some of their best units to this battle. Especially the Ukrainian side sending the best of their units to the Kursk region. Starting out in the south, the Russians have managed to advance in both the northern and southern flank of Kursk, where to the west of Delnya the Russians have captured a few forest lines, advancing along the southern flank of the fortified positions of the Ukrainians west of Kursk, and in the northern flank of Kursk the Russians have managed to close one of the pockets near Staryeterne. The Russians launched offensive operations north of Staryeterne to connect with Sonsivka from the northern direction to the south. This forced the Ukrainians to withdraw their forces under heavy fire from the Russian side, and this withdrawal went all the way towards Shevchenko, where the Russians managed to close what remained of the pockets, and the Ukrainian forces suffered a large defeat in between Sonsivka and Staryeterne with the closure of this pocket. The Ukrainian forces within this pocket suffered the same fate as the Ukrainian forces within the settlement of Makarivka, where they are simply abandoned to a Russian encirclement due to the refusal of sending a withdrawal order to their forces. The Ukrainians are not withdrawing a single meter these days with the fighting reaching the outskirts of the Donetsk region. They are buying as much time as possible for new fortifications to be built into the Dnipro region. Therefore, the Ukrainian side is trading men for time. The Russians have made several additional advances in the Pokrovsk section of the front line. They have managed to advance northwest of Soria, where they've managed to capture a fortified position and some forest patches. They've managed to capture the northern parts of Ukrainka, pushing the Ukrainians down to the southern part of it. They've managed to capture the entirety of Novolenivka, capture some fortified positions in forest lines northwest of Novolenivka, allowing them to gain a foothold within the eastern outskirts of Novojelisevetivka. The Russians have also managed to push the Ukrainians back towards the outskirts of Novovasilivka, where they've managed to gain a foothold in the eastern parts of the settlement. The Russians have also managed to reach the outskirts of Solone and Vovkove, here west of Pishane, following the capture of the river line and the forest patches, crossing over the river line and pushing into these settlements as well to the west of Pokrovsk. The Russians have also managed to advance within Vytorchenia, some incremental advances, and along the fortified positions west of Dashenske, capturing the southern flank of the Selene River, but then looking to push into the northern bank of the river line to enter the settlement and fight over the remaining parts of the first line of defense of the Ukrainians here south of Pokrovsk. Heavy fighting continues all across the Pokrovsk section of the front line and the Kursk section of the front line, with several Russian advances spanning the whole section of the front line, as the Russians are now only less than 3 kilometers from the first supply road as well as railway going in and out of Pokrovsk towards the Zaporizhia region and city, and they're only about 8 kilometers from the outskirts to the Dnipro region, but have managed to advance several times this month in the direction of the Dnipro region, covering about half of the distance between the two in the first 3 weeks of the month of December. The Russian advances are now mainly focused around Kursk and Pokrovsk, as the Russians are looking to take control over the fortified positions in between Pokrovsk in the north and Kursk as well as Velika Novosilka in the south. to cut off the connection in its entirety and to reach the Dnipro region, while at the same time advancing down south along the main highway between Pokrovsk and Kurakhove to reach the settlement of Anderivka from the north and Konstantinopel from the south along the river line to cut off the supplies in and out of Kurakhove and completely encircle the Ukrainian positions from Petropavlivka in the north to Yantarne in the south, encircling a massive amount of Ukrainian soldiers here in the Donetsk region. If the Ukrainians refuse to withdraw once again, it will not be a small pocket as in Makarivka and north of Beresky, but instead it will be a large pocket including several settlements and several Ukrainian units. This will all have a devastating effect on the Ukrainian armed forces. One of the main topics of the conflict between Deep State Map and Syrsky is the deep state criticism of the Russian encirclement of Makarivka, the Ukrainian armed forces' refusal to withdraw forces from Makarivka, and now we see a similar case has happened in the pocket north of Kurakhove, and this is besides the pocket which was closed here south of Delnya. This is 3 pockets that has been closed within a week's time in the direction of the Donetsk region. And this is catastrophic as it is one after another for the Ukrainian forces. The Russians have also now operationally encircled Velika Novosilka, while also very close to an operational encirclement of the entirety of Kurakhove, which could lead to a full encirclement of the entirety of Kurakhove and the surrounding areas. This is all very difficult developments for the Ukrainians. In the direction of Toretsk, there's been a new breakthrough by Russian forces. They've managed to advance along the northern flank of Leonidivka and western flank of Shcherbinivka to reach the school in the northwestern parts of Shcherbinivka. This advance was geolocated with this footage here. So we see the Russians have repeated the breakthrough they did from New York towards Leonidivka, just on the other side of the river line towards the flank of Shcherbinivka. With this, fighting has reached the settlement of Shcherbinivka, flanking several fortified positions of the Ukrainians, and their attempt is clearly to bypass the fortified positions of the Ukrainians in the western parts of Toretsk, following the capture of the industrial zone and the waste heaps in the southern parts and central parts of Toretsk, which could lead to a complete collapse of the Ukrainian defenses in the Toretsk direction and the Russian capture of this entire area. This will allow the Russians to bypass a significant portion of Ukrainian fortified positions north of Avdiivka and open the road between the Russian positions in Donetsk all the way up towards their Ukrainian positions in Konstantinivka, flanking the entire defensive area located here north of Avdiivka from the Toretsk direction, as well as connecting the front line from Toretsk in the south towards Chasiv Yar in the north. The Russians have managed to advance in the northern parts of Chasiv Yar in 2 separate advances, first capturing additional streets here in the northern districts of Chasiv Yar, then an additional street here earlier today. And with these advances, the Russians are bypassing the industrial area and the parking complex area in the central parts of the city. The Ukrainians have reportedly gathered about 150 soldiers into the industrial area following their capture of it. This will lead to heavy Russian bombardment of FAB bombs and artillery on those positions as they bypass their positions in the northern flank to cut off their withdrawal point and encircle the Ukrainian forces within the industrial zone. However, this is a difficult operation as the Ukrainians have control over the high ground with the apartment complex area, which makes it difficult for the Russians to achieve much more success than what they already have. However, this is likely a joint operation by the Russian forces from the northern and southern direction to enter into the apartment complex area and start challenging that, following the Ukrainian counterattack, which has used up some of the reserves of the Ukrainians in the Chasiv Yar direction. Moving on to the next section of the front line, the Russians have advanced in the direction of Devorishna, where they've managed to gain control over additional streets in the southern parts of Devorishna. There is the river line that goes through the northern and southern parts. It looks like the Russians are looking to gain control over the southern parts, which will allow the Russians to gain control of one of the main crossings across the Oskil river line to reach into the northern parts of the Devorishna as well. Gaining full control over this area allows the Russians to control the only settlement in a wide area. There's a wide distance between Devorishna and any other settlement, allow the Russians to control one of the main crossings in the northern parts, and allow a northern flank to an operation to capture Kupiansk in the future, or simply to expand their zone of control. If the Russians can plan a larger operation in the future to re-enter the Kharkiv region similar to the start of the conflict, the Russians could launch an operation connecting their forces near the Vorishne from the southeastern direction with the northeastern direction. So far, it is reported that the Russian grouping is not a large one. However, they are reaching a lot of success due to the thinning of Ukrainian forces all across the front line, as the Ukrainians are spread thinly across the front line to cover every single part, and this has led to some gaps in the Ukrainian defenses. One of such gaps has located in the direction of the Vorishne. The Russians have exploited that weakness and are now reaping the benefits of doing so. Finally, in the Kursk region, we see no advances by the Russians, but the start of a whole new offensive operation. It is reported that the Russians will launch a completely new massive offensive here in the Kursk region, incomparable to what we have seen so far. According to the latest reports, it is one massive offensive. The objective is to regain full control over the Kursk region for the Russian forces, and it will take place from every single direction, both to the south, east, and north, and northwest, as well as the western direction of Sucha, covering it from 3 directions. The objective is to gain full control over the Kursk region, which means complete control over the border area, which is along these fortified positions near the border. The Russians have already penetrated deep into the Ukrainian lines from the south of Sucha and are threatening encirclements of Ukrainian forces in the northwestern outskirts of the Ukrainian Kursk incursion. With a push through Svetlikovo, the Russians can reach the western outskirts of Sucha, and with a push from the south, they are able to cut off the remaining supply lines in and out of the Kursk region. It is limited how much more the Ukrainians can take here across the front line, but it is definitely for sure that the Russians are going all out in these coming weeks in terms of offensive operations, as they need to speed up their process if they are to end this war on their terms. And that is going to be all for this update. Thank you all for watching. Make sure to leave a like, subscribe, check out my Patreon and YouTube membership for additional content. Thank you all for watching and have a great day.